2
authors
Anonymous
with A.R. Mirabal
and Carolyn Rosa Paz. Ping pong. Bow bing. This is episode 8. Ocho. This is the pre-season finale. This is the pre. All right, the grand pre. We're gonna call it that.
It's our final tip episode of this season.
Yes.
Next episode, which, by the way, thank you to everybody who responded to me and AR's post. Next episode, we take one of those submissions that we've gotten and we critique it based on the episodes that we have done thus far. And I'm super excited. Like AR said, we're not going to trash anybody, but we're going to critique it. So it's not a typical review. We're going to be looking at the character development. We're going to be looking at the world building, the plot, and then also the punctuation and the nitty gritty, which is this episode of Nitty Gritty.
So it's like a culmination of everything we've talked about before. You can look at almost like the Marvel universe. This is the end game right here. This is it, bringing everything together, all the references, all the little knickknacks, all the Easter eggs that we talked about before. This is the culmination of all those topics to bring it all together, and then it leads right into the critique, as Carolyn talked about, and then the season finale, which is we take all those ideas, all the critiques, everything that we put together, and we actually make a small little plot line for everybody, a quick little 5-minute little thing with sock puppets, fully acted out, fully goofy, fully hanging around. But the entire idea is to convey the same topics and everything that we talked about through all those episodes and bring it all together, which is why it is called the Nitty Gritty. Yes. Carolyn, talk to these people about what is the crux of everything.
So since our 2 next episodes are going to be more fun and loose, this episode is going to be more nitty gritty, which what I mean by that is punctuation. It's not as exciting as the critiques, I know, but it is so important because a huge thing with punctuation is it totally puts together your style and way of writing. I mean, punctuation is huge when it comes to adding tension or emphasis or dramatic pause. And there's some do's and don'ts with certain punctuation. But to kick it off, the most common, probably aside from the period, is the comma. So commas obviously are just grammatically based to make your writing clean. You use it for a list of things. I like the Oxford comma, where it's a word, comma, and then another word. But they can also just be used to add a nice pause to something so that the reader knows when to slow down. And if you use it tactfully, you'll place it in certain dramatic or high intensity scenes. Comma slices, I'm sure all of you have heard that before. It's a second grade term. You don't want to go overboard with your commas. I mean, if anything, use a period, because periods are great for making that oomph, that point that brings everything home. But commas are good to drag things out in a good way.
Yes, definitely. And bringing together the whole thing of the Oxford comma, even that is a stylistic choice, which is, to me, where everything really is the home, outside of point of view, which we'll get into a little bit later in the episode, but stylistic choice is everything. Because even though me and Carolyn may prefer the Oxford comma might not work for everybody, and it might not work for the prose that you're using, and this is where it gets fun. And I can tell you, if this is anybody's first time author out there, if you're writing your debut, if you're at the same pace that Carolyn is in, or maybe you're a little bit ahead, maybe you're writing your book too, like I'm doing, there always seems like you're up against a wall, this feeling like you're never going to hit the perfect rhythm, the perfect prose in your writing. You'll feel happy with something on Monday, reread it on Wednesday and be like, God damn it, who even wrote this? Redo it, and then realize that what you had on Monday was actually a lot better than what you reread and rewrote on that Wednesday. It's such a back and forth. But I promise you, there is a light at the end of that road. There is a point where you feel that you just hit it, not only because you checked off everything that Grammarly said, or everything that your editor said, or everything that your reviewer said, but when you understand your stylistic choice, how you want to convey your emotions, how you want your characters to convey a certain topic, or the information that you want to omit. Like good music, the notes that you play are just as important as the notes that you don't. It's all a rhythm that you create.
Yes.
And when you have that, you have a beautiful music. Yeah, symphony.
Yeah, and I mean, when in doubt too, because you can get so hung up on where to put that comma or the em dash or what have you. But when in doubt, just write it out first and then go back and see, oh, would a comma be better here for dramatic emphasis, or would an em dash work better? And we'll get into em dashes in a second, but I want to say too that if you can get the grammar part of your punctuation down, it saves your editor to not focus on those minor details. And then your editor can actually do what editors do best and go deeper into the structure of your story and the style and the formatting. So I know punctuation like is dry and it can be tedious, but if you can get that down pat, like that's just kind of one thing less that you have to worry about in that editing phase, and you can really just focus on your story. So yes, Grammarly, like AR said, if you guys don't know what Grammarly is, it's really easy. You can just type into Google Grammarly and you can download it onto your computer, and it's super easy and it's safe. There's no viruses or anything, and it's free. But then you can also pay and get one that tells you what's a conciser sentence, not even a word, conciser, a more concise sentence. See, that's why Grammarly is good. I mean, so look into that, because you might think you know grammar, but English language is hard. I mean, anybody will agree on that. And then when you try to add your style to it, you're kind of just adding that another obstacle, basically. But yeah, punctuation is a great way to express your tone and the way your characters talk. Ao and I were actually talking about em dashes and when to use them instead of a comma. So I like em dashes when, like, I'll use it in dialogue if a character is getting cut off in a mid-sentence. So if a character talking and then another character interrupts them, I'll put an em dash there to show that the other character quickly interjected. And that's a better way than just a comma, because then the comma seems like it's unfinished. The em dash is like that in between a period and a comma type of thing. So it's, again, just kind of style. I know AR likes em dashes for other uses, so I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, I really like using em dashes for internal interjections. Like when you have a character that's kind of going back and forth between that ideas, an em dash at the end of a sentence, and even if it's just a small couple little lines. Like, for example, if you have an internal dialogue where the character's going like, oh man, I really like cheddar, and I'm more of a hard cheddar type of person. I mean, Gouda's all right, but blah, 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 and this and that. And then you have one little em dash, but then again, mozzarella. Now, the beautiful thing about that little em dash is, let's count that out. But again, that mozzarella, right? That's 5 words. Those 5 words almost invalidate the entire 3 lines that you talked about, that character going back and forth between how much he likes cheddar or mild or whatever the fuck, right? Because, and now, well, it kind of both ways, because it invalidates it in a way, because it's like, all right, well, you know, if he's going back and forth or she is going back and forth in such a fast manner, then what do they really believe? But it also, you can think about it, if you're optimistic, right, is that it adds new meaning to the top 3 lines. Because now you're understanding like the weight that it's, you know, they're putting a lot of emphasis into those decisions. Now, obviously, in your thing, it's not going to be about cheese. Probably going to be about, you know, some character development. He said this, they said that. I got shot. Right? You know how stories go. You know how plot lines develop. But that is the type of things that I like to use it for. Internal dialogue, internal debate, really.
Yeah. I like em dashes too. I think they have more of a flair to them. So again, to go back to like that comma example, if you're writing a sentence that, you know, is maybe sarcastic or something, like your character says, oh, this could work, em dash, or not. It works better than doing this could work, comma, or not, because the comma adds more of like the question. It's tying into that first phrase that you said. The em dash is that
separates it.
it separates it.
Yeah.
Yes, it is that contrast. So it's subtle, but it relates to the tone. So what kind of style are you writing? Are you writing quick and witty? You might use em dashes more. Is your style more long form poetic? You might use more commas. It all just depends on your style. And what AR said, how he likes using em dashes for internal dialogue. I like using italicizing things for dialogue, or internal dialogue. So when my character's thinking, I'll italicize that so then that reader knows, oh, okay, we're inside the character's head now. And I won't do that for a whole paragraph. The difference with em dashes is you can do an em dash and then write a whole paragraph, and grammatically it's correct. But in writing, you wouldn't write completely in, serif font and then italicize, and then have the rest of your paragraph be in italicized. So if you use italicizing words for internal thought, know that it probably has got to be shorter and a little bit more concise. Italicizes, I know AR has said he feels sometimes it can have a theatric kind of dramatic Shakespearean play.
Over dramatic. Yeah.
That's why it comes back to style. But go ahead about your hard feelings about italicizing.
Well, no, what it is, what I kind of like to think about, it's like cooking, right? Salt and pepper are necessary. Those are the A's, the thuds, like the regular parts of writing. But things like spices, a little coriander, a little cayenne, a little goes a long way in a recipe. Same thing goes with bolding, italicizing, em dashes, ellipses, circle, arrow pointing around that. Ellipses are one of those things that they add so much drama, but overuse of it dilutes it. Yeah. It's kind of like when everyone is a bestseller, then what does bestseller really mean? That type of argument. It's like if it's being used so rampantly throughout your work, then when it's used when you really want it to, it's kind of like the whole thing of a Boy That Cried Wolf. It's like, well, we don't really believe the emotion you want to convey now if you're just dropping it out of a hat.
And ellipses too are another tone kind of punctuation, because definitely, especially in dialogue, if you have a character talking and then I see an ellipse, the reader is reading that as if the character's voice trailed off. So they'll be talking and then it kind of gets and it slows down, it gets quiet. Whereas if you use an em dash, it's more like the character was talking and then it stops and that's it. It's more cut off. So is your character mid thought, is he excited about something, mid talking, and then gets cut off because italicized, he had another thought pop into his head? Or is he trailing off as he's thinking, while he's talking and he's thinking? So ellipses are more subtle and they're quieter. And then em dashes are more bold. The voice doesn't get quieter. So again, it is a stylistic kind of thing. I'm not a huge fan of ellipses unless they're in dialogue. That's just me personally. I don't see how it would make sense in what I call the language of text, which we'll get to that, but that's just the words in your book that aren't dialogue, but with describing things. I don't have any examples of when I think ellipses would fit, mostly because I don't use them in my book. But if you do, great. Tell me how you use it, because I feel like I don't see that often. Do you use ellipses in yours?
I do use it, but again, very sparsely. I think the one time that I use it is when XC, the whole alien creature, is being announced. And just the description of how Zako does it is that he does do that trail off type of thing where he almost wants to say one word and it's pretty obvious he wants to say one word, but he does it's imaginative, that type of thing. But again, you have to be very sparse on that, because I think if I use that too much, then you wouldn't catch on to it and you would probably just read by it like it was nothing else. But the fact that I use it literally, I think maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the entire book, it immediately calls that to that attention when you see it.
Yeah.
But Carolyn brings up a great point about kind of hacky things, I guess, if you want to think about it like that, which are things that are low-hanging fruit, basically.
Yeah.
Easy at face value, but then in reality, it just eludes your writing in the grander sense.
Yeah.
So one of these things, and it's honestly an amazing word. Carolyn taught me it a couple days ago. I thought it was way cooler than it was, but it wasn't, folks. It's called interrobang.
Yes.
Right? Sounds way cooler than it is.
Yeah.
Trust me. what it is when you double use an exclamation, basically. So you put what question mark exclamation point and quotation. That is incredibly hacky slash lazy writing. And I honestly, I hate to sound that like condescending, but really it's one of those things that I say from a point of doing it and having learned my lesson.
Yeah.
Because you really should be able to convey, like Carolyn said it perfectly when we were talking about this before we recorded, is if they have two emotions, then you should be writing those two emotions. Like you're literally like missing out on the grand scheme of what writing is. Like you're the whole poetry, the whole aspect, the actual literature of the writing, just so you can progress the plot a little faster than you want it to. So things like that, you know, they may work in a comic book when you have like an image and all that, and you have like the face like popping up, but it does not translate into novels. So
that's a great point.
One of those things that you just always have to consider. And again, the real artistry floats in when you start doing that. Because imagine that instead of doing the what question mark exclamation point, you do what exclamation point. What question mark. She screamed as a wave of haunting questions float over her head, and then the next line paragraph after that you talk about how the thoughts, she was drowning in her thoughts, and now you just have an illusion, right? Now you have a double entendre. You have crashing, actually the actual physical feeling of like emotions being crashed on top of you, but you also have the allusion to water. And again, that's where the fun part of writing is. That's like where that 7th grade we're gonna study Shakespeare comes in, right? And you're going into things talking to the teacher. Why do we even know about? How do you know he even meant this? It makes no sense. He did mean it. We're talking about it right now. That's like things that you have to start considering in the grand scheme of things. And again, it seems scary, but that is the real fun of it, because then you can start playing around with it. And again, my favorite thing about writing is that there are no rules here. Everything we're saying are guidelines. There are times in your writing that you're going to want to convey an emotion that to you has not been done before, or you at least haven't read the literature on it. So you really have to just how am I going to deal with this? Do I italicize? Do I bold it? Do I do this? That's the fun part.
Yeah, that's for you to figure out. And like I said, it's up to you in the style, but I would have to say the interrobang is pretty much a don't do. You never use exclamation point, question mark, because the reader's going to see that and just kind of get taken away from the story. 2 little punctuations, like it seems little, but it's huge. It is lazy writing. You need to, like AR said, talk about how the excitement of whatever they're saying crashed on them like a wave or whatever that description is. And then bonus points if you can make that analogy relate to element or to a theme that you have in your book. So if it is water, I actually have water as a theme in my book. I would use, it crashed on me like a wave, now I'm drowning in emotions, all these things that can tie to your theme, which that pushes your plot so much further. That brings your plot much more together than just trying quickly to get through it by just putting not random, but unnecessary amount of punctuation in a sentence. And AR made a good point too, bringing up bolding and other things with that, with bolding or writing in all caps or interjections. These are kind of like the low-hanging fruits, because at least with writing in all caps, I also think that is a don't do. I'm not saying you don't ever see it, but typically it's only with homophones. So words that are like a big bang or boom, those are words that are sounds that might be in all caps in your text. If it's like a sudden explosion and it's just kind of like a cutoff and it's like boom, then your reader knows, oh, there was an explosion, because that's just commonly accepted in the English language of that homophone. But you wouldn't, other than that, write in all caps in any other way. I mean, nobody likes reading all caps when you get a text or when you read comments on YouTube. It's aggressive and it's too much. I mean, and again, it's lazy writing. If your character is yelling, talk about how the veins are popping on their neck, or how my ear started ringing of the high-pitched screech. Like, that's just where the fun is. That's where you can really get into your creative writing than just having them write or speak in all caps. So I wouldn't write in all caps. Don't use the interrobang. Bolding can be interesting, although I always opt for, again, italicizing as opposed to bolding. But there are 2 different kinds of moods. I like italicizing when it's like more of a stressed kind of word. So if my character is saying, just wait a minute, Notice how I said just wait. That's italicized. That's that stress on that word. Bolding, I think maybe you could use if it's like, I think if you're describing something like a stop sign and you want to say the sign said stop, then you would bold it. And that's more of a description kind of punctuation there. I don't know much about any other examples where people use bolding in their writing aside for description purposes.
Well, again, we don't even have to like really list all the different ways we can do it, because again, that is just where it goes into style, right? Again, there are going to be times, I can almost guarantee you, even if you're writing the most skeleton of, prosy and tropey writing you can imagine ever, you just copy whatever your favorite movie is and go line by line, change different characters. Even then, you're going to get to a point of, oh man, how do I convey this emotion the way I want this emotion to conveyed? And you're going to really sit back, because you're going to be like, oh shit, well, I've never seen it in any movies I've liked. I haven't read any books that were like this. I talk to my friends, they don't really know what to do with it. What am I going to do? That is where you have to, just like you're solving a math problem or just any problem in life, you have to start really outsourcing. Like, all right, well, how can I use this bold to get my point across? How can I use italicize to start like conveying shit? Oh, I haven't used an ellipsis yet. Maybe that'll work here. Oh, I haven't used M dash here. Maybe that's where it goes. Everything is just how you want to do it. And I think that goes perfectly, leads in to the actual descriptive elements, the larger aspects of what this whole nitty gritty thing is, right?
Yes,
like
the language of text. That is now this topic. You're describing, you're not just like describing how a flower looks, but when you're just writing your plot or writing a scene or describing how a flower looks, whatever. This is all those things that is everything but your dialogue. And this is where punctuation will come in too, when you're writing the plot or in the scene of something, because then that'll add, the punctuation adds the type of mood. One of the things that AR and I've talked about before as well, that if you're writing a book that takes place in the future or in the past, make sure that your language of text is also from that area, from that era. Think of time and place. What year does your book take place and where are they living? What are some slangs that people in your world or in your country use? How would a British person describe a basketball game? Fun fact, they say basketballer instead of basketball players. So kind of know that. Little tips, knowing about where you're writing, and then make sure the rest of your text follows through so that everything is consistent. Consistency really is key.
I actually have a funny little anecdote about that. I had a DCI Morton, I'm sorry. I think I've mentioned him before. He was a author that I had, awesome criminal author, like actual real deal bestseller, like 2,000 reviews on each book that he has on Amazon, like monster. So he was talking to me about a book that he was writing, and he actually read like a little passage for the podcast, which was awesome. And in it, he was talking about a murder scene that they had found, and in it, he was talking about that they found, like a used tampon, or like, just like listing. Probably it wasn't a tampon. I don't know why it was a tampon. I'd probably be talking to a therapist about that for years when my mind went to there. But whatever, it was just listing off things, and one of the things that it listed was a trainer. Now, I watch British TV before. I know trainer means shoe. But to an American audience, you're in your head, thinking there's like guy from Planet Fitness tied up in a ball, right? Because that's where your mind goes to. Oh, a trainer. It's like, oh, damn, that's tough. But trainer is just a shoe. So right there is just kind of a regional thing. Now, that is honestly a little out of your element. If you write for an American audience and someone in India doesn't get an idiom that you use, I'm sorry, but I don't think that's really your fault. I don't think you should be me too. Yeah. Sorry, but what I think it does tie into is knowing your place and knowing the genre that you're in, one, and knowing the setting and location of where you're in. An example that when me and Carolyn had talked about before was, let's say that you are writing a dystopian futuristic book. you're going through it. The characters are living a crazy hyped up society. Everything is like a feeling and an emotion, and like, you know,
All advanced.
everything's advanced. There's like no pain. Everyone's just having sex all the time. No STDs. Who gives a fuck? Right?
That's good.
I'm saying, right? Everyone's just having a grand old time. And everyone's chilling. And then slowly it starts trickling down. You know, they realize there's like people outside the wall or outside the bubble or outside the fucking lake house, whatever the fuck it is that was supposedly unrestricted in quarantine. And you're like, oh my God, actually, we've been lied to, right? And I'm making fun of it, knowing damn well I wrote the same shit. But anyway, they eventually go out to the crusty part of the world, and you know, with the crusty ass people that don't have shit. And when they get to that point and they see a well, you can't just describe a well as a person from this high crazy society would describe would be able to perceive a well. How would they know the hand crank and be able to just describe it as like, oh, that's a hand crank, that's how a well works? They have no perception of that.
Right.
A future, I can't even imagine they have an idea of a sink, let alone a fucking well at that level of technology. So how are you going to be able to just downgrade to something like that so easily? And again, this is where the fun part comes in. Because how would you describe something like that? I actually had a little bit of a trouble myself where there's a part in the book where the kids basically see a homeless person for the first time. And it was actually really hard for me because how do you describe a homeless person to a society that thinks it's perfect? To them, it would just be you would just be flabbergasted. Like, why? How is this person even that skinny? Or like, you know, why is nobody helping them? This is an insane concept. So that is how you have to treat things. You have to look at it from the point of view of your characters and in the time frame that they're in.
And I mean, that leads into our topic of point of view for part of the nitty gritty, but I want to backtrack a minute too, because AR made a good point about genre and knowing your type of story and how the description needs to fit your genre. Because if you're writing something like a murder mystery, typically it's very fast paced. Everything in murder mysteries screams fast paced. The bright yellow tape, the zooming ambulances, the flashing lights, cops move fast. So therefore your plot, your genre, everything is always fast paced. Your description, you might write more concise. You might use periods more than you would commas because you're just getting to the point and you're going through it. But if you're writing something like science fiction or even a trilogy or a whole saga of a book, you might have more long form descriptions and long form writing because you have the time and you have much more world building and you have more things to describe because there's so much more to it. There's more in your story. So the description is huge when it comes to controlling the pacing of your story and the plot of your story. Those are kind of like the three points is pacing.
The holy trilogy.
Yes, that is it. The pacing, the genre, and then description. All of those need to balance each other so that it's one continuous flow. And how you do that is with your punctuation. That's why we keep stressing that is so important because that's all about tone and style. And just always keep those three trinities in your mind when thinking about that. Or I guess it'd be one trinity, but keep that in mind when writing. You got to keep consistent first page to last page with the style of your writing, with your genre, and then how you're describing things. And like IR said about the well, you know, with point of view, is it a narrator that's describing that well, or is it a character that's describing that well? Because if it's a character from like that great like utopian society and then coming out and seeing a well and maybe poor people like just like rummaging to get their basic needs met, they're going to describe it totally different the way a narrative would. So that's also huge, knowing how you begin your writing. You know, is it going to be first person? Is it third person? Do you change perspectives? And I don't mean change the first person to second person. You never do that in writing. But what I do for my book is it's first person, but each chapter is through the eyes of a different character, because I want my reader to know what all my characters are feeling and thinking, but I want it to be from that first person perspective. I don't want it to be from a narrator. And I know AR's first book is from first person and he's now writing in a narrator, and he'll tell you that it's not easy at all to do that, to switch when you get comfortable with one kind of writing.
Well, yeah, now that I think about it, even the whole point of view, and so just to backtrack a tiny little bit, the whole thing with point of view and consistency is basically the of not only this episode, but basically this entire season. Whatever it is that you choose, everything that we talked about with the style, if you are bolding every time that you see a stop sign, if you're using italicized every time that you're having internal monologue, if you're using ellipsis every time that you want somebody to trail off, that has to be consistent. If you do a trail off for an ellipsis in chapter 2, and then you use it again in chapter 5 for, I don't even know what, a character transition, then you kind of fucked up.
You confuse the reader. They don't know what you're using the ellipsis for then.
Exactly.
If you break that trust with the reader, they won't know what they're trying to read. I mean, they won't know what emotion they're supposed to be having when they're reading your book, which is why, again, I said it and I'll say it again, consistency is key.
Yeah, so you have to think about it like the readers are basically people being lured into like the dark forest of your reading. You're like giving out breadcrumbs. If you lose trust, they're not going to keep on following you into the river or down the mountain or wherever the fuck your book takes place. They're not going to follow you into the spaceship or whatever the fuck. You really have to keep on, be transparent, and not only that, but stick to your guns. And that's where the point of view really takes hold. And that's where even the point of view, how depending on how you choose and how you master and how you decide to conquer in your writing to convey your emotions, it is going to make a huge back and forth on everything that you write. It's going to affect the Holy Trinity, as Carolyn talked about, the punctuation, your tone, because when you have a first person point of view, the whole thing that I like about it is that now your world is a little bit more opened up. For example, if something happens to me and you're getting my point of view of it, that's my point of view. If you get Carolyn's point of view, that's her point of view. So if we were to write each of ours down, we're going to have different point of views.
Right.
And you as the reader have to have the fun little ooh of knowing both sides, and you get to decide where the middle actually lies, where it actually is the truth, which one was actually happening. He said that he was yelling at her. He said that he was, talking calmly. Where did it actually go here?
Right. And that's fun for the readers then to talk about with other readers. And that's where I think those fan fights or whatever they're called, where people come in and take different interpretations of the book. I mean, you've done this in all of your English classes, definitely, where the reader or the teacher is like, what do you think this means? That's what that is. When you have a narrator, there's really no question about it because the narrator is telling you exactly what it means.
Depending on how you use it. One of my favorite things that I have not written in yet, but I want to, it is definitely in my bucket list of writing, is the whole idea of a fake narrator, or the narrator that actually is low-key one of the main characters. Like a famous example I can pretty think of is like the whole Midnight in Scranton, whatever the fuck, that the fake movie that Michael made within the office. So that whole thing ends with like the narrator, obviously narrating the movie, and then it ends to find out that the narrator actually just is Michael Scarn from the future. Now, things like that are interesting. Now, especially if you can do it that it's like a random side character that you thought had no relevance to the book whatsoever, that you thought died in like chapter 5. Now, that would be kind of interesting because, again, you add like a whole different perspective. Another book, one of my favorite books that I actually very low-key got inspiration for Allegory of the End from was Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five. Okay. Where the entire book is literally a false narrative. Everything that the character tells you may or may not have happened. So just like that whole perception of it versus what you actually find out is that, the actual you never find out what actually caused it, but then you realize how the world is affected by it. So it's like, oh, wait a minute, what actually happened here? So, and again, that is where the fun lies. Everything is stylistic and everything goes back to how you want to convey your writing, which again, it seems like it's a hurdle. And while you're going through it, it seems like it's really hard because you might have an editor that comes in and tells you XYZ. You're using Grammarly, it's telling you that it's not how you're supposed to use it. There are certain things that you really have to stick by your guns with and be like, listen, word processor, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Go sit down over there. I'll call you when I need you.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a matter of, basic grammar you can't argue with. The interrobang, definitely just a don't. But then when you're describing how your character feels, your editor is not going to say, oh no, you can't do this. The editor is just to focus on the punctuation and the grammar of it. But then how you decide to use it, that's your writing. That is your style. And you get the say in that. But also, I know we're talking about point of view, so I want to go back to that for just a minute, because I said you don't go back and forth between different narratives. You don't start in first person and then end in third. Obviously, I think everybody knows this, but if you do find yourself, especially if this is like your first time writing a book, and you notice you're doing that, one way to check yourself is if you're writing in first person and then you try to explain how not your main character is feeling, you might catch yourself and be like, well, wait, how do I know that other character is feeling that? You wouldn't. If you're writing in first person, that main character doesn't know exactly what the secondary character is thinking. A narrator would know. If you're writing in first person, you stick to that first person mentality. Just like going back to our well example, that character, main character seeing a well, they're going to describe it through their eyes and totally different than the way a narrator would be like, he was complected, whatever, by this foreign object, blah, blah, blah. So the narrator is describing how that character feels. It's not the main character describing how everybody else feels. So it's almost like that bird's eye kind of view when you're writing in the narrator form. And then when it's first person, it's that centered kind of perception. And also, I just want to make two other notes, just going back to punctuation for basic grammar things, because AR made a good point before we started recording, that back to like when using punctuation, like things like exclamation points or question marks, and then having that tag at the end. So if I have a question, or if I have a character ask a question and it ends in a question mark, you want to then say, Timmy asked, because there's already a question mark within what they're saying. You could just say, what is that? Timmy said, or Timmy inquired, or something a little different. You don't want to be repetitive. I'll let AR talk about this because I think you hit it home before we started recording.
Well, the whole thing about being repetitive and the whole thing, well, the main crux of everything is to wrap everything that we've been talking about and everything that we've said as far as like punctuation, is that it's all about the Holy Trinity. The punctuation. You got to worry about a description. You got to check yourself, like always be relevant to where your writing is. Be there. Be 100% concentrated, zen out, do whatever you got to do, light some incense, drink your coffee, tea if you're not doing caffeinated shit, whatever it is. Zen the fuck out and be in your world and really place yourself there. The cool thing about the narrator is that you can just, well, the cool thing about anything, and you can invent new ways. I mean, who knows? Maybe you can do like a fifth person point of view where I don't even know how that would work. Show me. Yeah. I'd love to read that type of shit. Everything is 100% inventive. Like, we can talk till the cows come home on the different ways you can do it. But really, and I hate to get a little nerdy, but it's kind of like when you learn math. It's like when you learn the basics, after that, you should be able to solve any equation. And that is what it's going to be. You're going to be pros with more and more equations when you like start hitting deeper in chapters. Like, it's like, oh man, how the fuck am I going to solve that? There's 3 exponents and fucking like, there's not even like a number in there. How am I going to solve that? But then you figure it out.
Punctuation is the math in writing.
Yes.
Essentially.
Yeah. And just like it, everybody fucking hates it. Even if you're good at it, you hate it. That's how it works, because it's annoying as shit. But it's crucial to everything that you do. And when you have it, I'm telling you, it really feels like it's almost impossible. You're looking at the same sentence for 3.5 hours and just not understanding why it's not making sense in your head. Yeah. But I promise you, there is gonna hit that moment that you're just like, yep, high fives, boom, what's up? This and shit right here. You'll get those
one-liners. You know when you're reading a book and you come across a line and you kind of just read it over and over and you're like, that was a really good sentence. And I mean, like, not even something that you had wrote, but when you're reading a book by a different author and they just say that one line and it hits you, look at how they did their punctuation. Did they have commas in there, or was it just a hard period? You know, one thing like could be, you could write, he died, period. And it's just, is that like Oh my God. Like, it's 2 words with such a powerful impact. And then with that period, it kind of is just like, and that's it. And if you did a comma, you might say, he died, comma, and I cried really hard. And that just adds more emotion or adds more to it, but it's all just style. How do you want the reader to feel when they are reading your sentences? Look at the punctuation. Does it fit then with your genre? Does it fit with the tone of your story? And then, like we said, bonus points if you can use those descriptive words to make it connect to certain themes in your book. So that is why, again, it is the math of writing, because you're taking these different elements and you're equating that perfect sentence.
Yes. Yeah, mic drop, boom. And that is going to be the end of the episode. I mean, you put all these things together, and I can promise you, you'll at least be at a better spot than we were when we started. Very minimum. I can't guarantee you're going to be a bestseller, but then again, on Amazon. But without throwing shade, there's at least, you're going to be at least 5-10 steps higher than I was when I started my shit. Carolyn can speak about her own, but I'm telling you, these are the things I truly, in the bottom of my heart, wish I knew when I started writing my book. And I'm still learning, folks. That's the beautiful thing of here. Anybody has anything to say in contrast to what we're saying, believe me, I actually really want to hear it. There's no negativity. I would love the type of criticism, because then I can add it to my repertoire. Now I understand, like, oh shit, now I can, next time I come up with that math problem that I only thought there was one way to do it, right? Remember, like, when you learn long division and then you figure out like the other way of doing it, you're like, wait, what the fuck is life? That's how writing is. You're going to find this one way, and you think the only way of solving it is this long ass equation that takes like 3 pages. And then you finally find the equation, the little crack in the code that you're like, oh, wait a minute, I can just shorten it down to this little thing right here. And now I made it more witty. And now I can like add it and do all this crazy math and like add all these crazy themes about light and darkness and back and forth. I mean, and Caroline and I have talked about that till the cows come home. But again, that's the type of shit you got to keep on the DL. That's for you and your homies to know. Know what I mean? And for them to find out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you don't want to info dump and just not trust your reader that they won't pick up on that stuff. You need to be a good enough writer that you can put it in there subtly enough that the reader will be like, oh, wait a minute, and have them think that they're thinking of it for themselves.
Exactly.
They don't want to know they're being spoon fed. Yeah. It's almost like when you're
Inception.
You do like the airplane. The baby doesn't want to like know it's coming. It's focused on the airplane. It's focused on the story. Well, it's also getting the nutrients of the bean and carrots. Kind of like that same thing. So when you're writing and doing things with the punctuation and then your pacing and the style of how you write and your language of text, it's basically all those little math equations in there equating to the bigger story. And this is what we're going to do when we critique next week. We're going to be breaking it down, breaking it apart, and looking at all of the minor things that present you the entire book. And
so watch out for that next week. Yes. Our first critique. Woof, it's gonna be a fun one. Ooh, it's gonna be a fun one. I do believe first victim. No, it's gonna be Adam Gaffin, the homie, the OG, hella fans of the podcast. Even Carolyn's met this man.
He's great.
Yeah, prolific,
He's
honestly.
Very knowledgeable. He's not going to be easy to critique. We're actually, me and AR are kind of setting ourselves up for failure here a little bit. He is a phenomenal writer. We've started reading his book. I'm not going to give much of it away, but he is an excellent writer. And I think it's because he knows how to use his punctuation and how to make his dialogue just work in the way that he's trying to write it, where he puts his em dashes when a character gets cut off, or where he puts the comma and then, or the ellipses. He uses all of these elements, which is like one of the reasons why we really want to critique this book, because he's helping us out here. I mean, this isn't just me and AR talking out of our ass. These are actual writers that are doing this stuff and that you'll end up doing too. So we're going to talk about it next week. Go on and on, but this is it.
This Episode is it.
8. Yeah.
Boom. 9 coming up, and then 10. I'm telling you, I myself am geeking for 10. I cannot wait to do a little sketch with the sock puppets. Oof, it's gonna be a fun.
They come back.
They come back.
Stay in training.
Larry and Carrie over here are coming back. They're coming back.
Carrie.
Yeah.
So until then,
this
you.
has been Authors
Anonymous
with Carolyn Rosa Pops.
and AR Mirabal.
Okay, hit us with that soprano.
I know.
Or
But an opera terrible at singing. All right. For
peace out. Check
here.
with us next week. Peace out.